to today's Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services for New York webinar, Finding Aid Basics and Introduction to DACS. We've got a really great and somewhat large group today. Please feel free to use the chat box on the side to send questions you might have as we go along. With this system, we don't have online participatory chat, so you won't necessarily see the questions you post. We will be receiving them here, and I will probably be responding to some as I go along and holding others for the end. Jason Henn, the DHPSNY Communications Assistant, will be helping me with fielding questions and any technical difficulties that might occur. Just so you're aware, the presentation is being recorded and it will be available on our website sometime next week. To get started, I'll introduce myself. I am Amelia, the Archive Specialist for DHPSNY. If you request an archival assessment, chances are I'm the one who will be working with you. I am a trained archivist and I have worked with a wide variety of archives, mostly in Texas and California, ranging from large universities to tiny archives whose entire holdings are stored in a bathroom. Hold on just a second. Okay, sorry about that. A little bit about our organization. DHPSNY, or the Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services for New York, is an initiative to deliver essential training and services to New York's collecting institutions. DHPSNY services include archival needs assessments, preservation and conservation surveys, guidance with strategic planning, and access to a variety of educational programs and workshops. It was established in 2016 by the New York State Education Department's Office of Cultural Education to ensure consistent and comprehensive services to the vast network of organizations that safeguard New York's records and make them accessible. DHPSNY is making these services available free of charge to New York-based organizations that collect, preserve, and make accessible historical records and/or library research materials. Upcoming workshops that you should keep an eye out for. We've got a processing archival collections in May in Pocantico Hills. I'm really sorry if I mispronounced that. Delmar, Jamestown, Rochester, and Plattsburgh. You can check our website for more dates and details. Before diving into finding aid components and DACS, I want to lay a bit of groundwork for context. Note that this workshop will focus on writing the finding aid, not processing and arranging the collection. So to understand archival repositories, holdings, and descriptive cataloging, one must first understand what archives are and how they differ from libraries. So the definition of a library is a collection of resources in a variety of formats that is organized by experts who provide access with the mission of educating, informing, or entertaining a variety of audiences. And most importantly for our purposes, libraries organize and catalog materials on an item level. Each book or CD or publication has a unique catalog record to assist users. Archives, on the other hand, in an archive, the types of materials you find are incredibly varied. This here is just a short list of all of the possible materials or types of records that you can find within an archive. Basically, a record or archival material can refer to anything that provides contextual evidence for an activity or historic event. Perhaps the biggest difference between archives and libraries is that where libraries organize materials at an item level, archives organize and describe their materials in groups. In the book, Developing and Maintaining Practical Archives, Gregory Hunter describes archives as groups of related items. These items do not stand alone. They gain significance and importance from their relationship to other items. And for any literature or resources that I reference in this webinar, I will have a bibliography as one of the slides at the end. So in an attempt to curb confusion about the term archive, let's go over the definitions. The term archives can be used to refer to multiple aspects of archiving. It can refer to materials, which would be non-current records of an institution or an organization or an individual that are preserved because of their enduring value. It can refer to the place or the repository. It can also refer to the archival agency or the program that is responsible for handling the archives. In order to organize the records housed in an archive, we need to process them. Processing is the arrangement, description, and housing of archival collections for storage and use by patrons. Basically, it is organizing everything. Arranging collections provides basic physical control. It ensures authenticity. It preserves the context of the material's creation and use. And processing is also when you perform preservation work, typically consisting of rehousing and providing proper enclosures for materials. Overall, processing makes collections easier to use. The organization of the collection is more apparent, information is easier to find, and it also makes it easier to know if materials go missing or there are preservation issues such as new pests or maybe an infestation of mold. Some of the very basic steps in processing would be first arrangement, followed by housing, and then a description of the collection. It is important to remember that processing does not happen in a vacuum. All of these steps start to happen at once. Processing is a complex process, and it is impossible for me to teach it in such a short time, so I'm going to take this opportunity to insert a little more shameless promotion. If you are interested in learning more about processing, please join my workshops coming up next week, and you'll find more information on those on our website. Okay, so when organizing collections, the job of archivists is to discover the creator's own arrangement and to describe that arrangement and the contents. We try to maintain original order and provenance because these components preserve the context of the records, and the creator's own organization can serve to illustrate the process of their work or the purpose of its creation. These are some of the key terms we use when describing archives and processing. We have already touched on repository, so basically it's just any type of organization that holds and preserves documents of enduring value. When talking about collections, it is important to remember that it is a group of materials with some unifying characteristic. The principle of provenance dictates that the records of one person or organization are not to be mixed with the records of another person or organization. Based on this principle, you wouldn't combine letters from a collection of family papers with a different collection of letters, even if they both pertain to World War I. The creator is the defining element of the collection, not the topic. Earlier, we defined a collection as a group of materials with some unifying characteristic, a person, a family group, a corporate body, or a subject, either in a common source such as a natural product of a particular activity, or a function, in other words, provenance. It can also be gathered purposefully and artificially without regard to original provenance. Artificial collections are inevitable, although we do try to avoid them. It is important, however, to use provenance whenever possible as the defining factor of a collection. And original order. It also guides arrangement. Whenever possible, you should keep the records in the order and sequence in which they were created and used. In some cases, there may not be an obvious order, so you will need to create one in order to make the collection accessible. Original order is not always obvious or simple, so it is important that you evaluate the arrangement of an entire collection before it is rearranged. Maintaining original order in archival collections is key, as it preserves both existing relationships and any significance that can be inferred from the context of the records. So this chart represents the levels of control used to group and organize collections in an archive. These groups were arranged in a hierarchy going from the largest level to the smallest. And when arranging your collections, you would first group the records in ways that describe a relationship between those records. This can be based on provenance, informational character, or physical nature. Some of the groups that you see on this chart represent intellectual arrangement. Some represent a physical arrangement or a combination of the two. Take, for instance, the collection itself. The collection is defined as a group based on who created the records. This group or collection may be so large or have so many different material types within it that the repository cannot house the entire collection on the same shelf space. You would rely on your collection guide or finding aid to describe the intellectual arrangement and connect that to the physical arrangement. Since the items comprising a unit inherit so much of their meaning from the higher level components to which they belong, when you are writing your finding aid, most of the significant descriptive work can take place at the higher levels in the structure. This usually makes it unnecessary to describe the myriad materials at the bottom of the arrangement hierarchies. This means less writing for the archivist and less reading for the user. The research relevance of materials throughout the collection is, to a great extent, revealed through an appreciation of the intellectual structure of the collection. And this is the real power of archival description. I'm going to go on and define these levels, and then we can take a look at a few examples. So the repository is the highest level, and it's simply the archive itself. Technically, all of the material in your repository has been arranged at this level. So congrats, you've already done some arrangement without even realizing it. The collection is a group of material with some unifying characteristic. The term record group or fonds can also be used if the unifying characteristic is provenance. Fonds refers to the creator or the provenance. It's really just the same thing. It means that the same creator put together all of the records or collected all of the records, or the same organization created the records. So the next level down is the series. A series consists of materials grouped together within the collection because they are a certain type of record or because they are used in a certain way. Of all the levels, the series best illustrates the actual activities of the creator. You can also have subseries, and those would follow similar rules. A common function-based series that you may see in a finding aid would be legal papers, business papers, personal papers, or genealogical research papers. And common format-based series you might come across would be diaries, ephemera, photographs, AV material, or clippings. Just as a side note, you should always avoid titling a series miscellaneous. It just is a really unhelpful title to any researchers. It doesn't give any information as to what you could expect to find within that series. After series comes the file level, and this refers to a group of documents within the series or subseries related by use or topic, and typically housed in a folder together, or a group of folders when it's larger than a single folder. Some collections will have clearly discernible files, and others will not. Common arrangement at the folder level is by date of creation or receipt. It can be alphabetically by subject, geography, or personal or corporate name. And then the lowest and smallest level of arrangement is the item. That would be a map, a letter, a journal, stuff like that. And technically an item can consist of several pieces, such as, say, an 8-page letter. That would still be one item. When arranging collections, you'll start your way from the topmost level and work your way down. It is also a helpful way to break arrangement down into smaller and more manageable tasks. Arrange at the series level for a collection before pursuing folder level. As a general rule, you should strive for series-level arrangement for all the holdings in your repository before pursuing file or item-level organization of larger collections. Your aim should be a minimum standard that provides timely access to coherently arranged collections. When considering file or item-level arrangement, it is important to keep in mind the time and resources necessary to complete this work. If you arranged every collection at the item level, you'd never be done, and in some cases, item-level arrangement might not even be necessary or desirable. So you need to balance your resources, the needs of your users, and the importance of the collection. So finding aids. Archivists describe the arrangement and organization of collections in the finding aids. The finding aid will be your public document that you provide to your researchers. It enables your researchers to gain a general understanding of the collection before they ever touch the materials, and it can help focus their research needs. A finding aid is a generic term, and it can refer to several formats. According to the Society of American Archivists, a finding aid is a single document that places the materials in context by consolidating information about the acquisition and processing, provenance, including administrative history or biographical note, scope of the collection, size, subjects, media, organization and arrangement, and an inventory. These are the things that you would want to find in a finding aid. Finding aids can be complex, and different repositories will use slightly different formatting rules. So I find one of the best ways to improve your own finding aids is to look at other people's examples. Here is a short list to get you started, but it's also useful to search for finding aids of collections that are similar in subject or creator to the one that you are working on. So remember that archives are organized in groups and not by items. Your finding aid will provide information on the history of the collections and its creator. And be brief. Remember that you are not the researcher. You just want to give researchers a general sense of what is in the collection. Be accurate. Most of your information should be pulled directly from the collection material. And again, a reminder of brevity, only mention the exceptional items in the collection. You don't need to provide a description of everything that's in the collection. So what is DACS? Now that we have a general understanding of a finding aid, we can dig deeper into how DACS is relevant to them. So basically, it is a set of rules to describe collections of all types, and it is the standard for American archives. Within DACS, it defines 25 elements or components or sections used to describe the archival materials. It can support single-level or multi-level descriptions, single-level meaning a collection or an item level, and multi-level meaning the relationships between the parts or the elements. And it gives guidelines for both full or traditional as well as minimum description. DACS is broken up into 3 parts, and in part 1, these would be the rules for each of the 25 elements. And while the rules apply to all levels of description and forms of material, if a repository wants to describe particular media at item level or another detailed level, these rules won't really work so well because of the varying nature of institutional requirements in this area. DACS just can't anticipate all of the various ways an institution may organize and describe their archives. There are, however, some examples to exceptions of the rules as well as common examples. Part number 2 outlines rules that allow you to give context to the collection by naming people, places, historic events, or corporate bodies that influence the creation of the letters or archival materials. And when creating this documentation, standardized vocabulary must be used, such as the Library of Congress naming authority. And number part 3 would be the resources and appendices. And this would be resources for content standards for special types of collections, such as architecture records or graphic materials or AV materials and maps. There's also a crosswalk to other descriptive data cataloging standards. And if you work with an institution such as a library, this is an extremely helpful resource for creating MARC records for archival collections. So now we'll look at how DACS is used in creating standardized finding aids. These are the 10 elements that are required in every finding aid. And if you notice in the bottom, the little box is a snapshot of the DACS table of contents, and note how next to every element it says whether or not it's required. Now we're going to go over each of these elements in details. So the title of the collection. And for this first element, I'm going to walk you through some of the highlighted rules in DACS, but we'll get to that part in a second. So titles generally have two parts. The nature of the material, when it says you need the name of the creator, and then it says you need to describe the nature of the materials being described. Nature of materials refers to the descriptions such as collections, materials, papers, records. You can see that word on the end of the list of examples of archival collection titles. So archival materials are frequently described by devised aggregate terms such as papers for personal materials, or records for organizational materials, or collection for topical aggregations. Other terms are also used. It kind of depends on your repository and what you feel your researchers are going to look for. Titles should be constructed in a coherent and consistent format according to the rules of the individual institution. So this is where I'm going to try to switch over to the PDF that I've highlighted, and I'm only going to walk you through this first element just so that you can see how DACS looks. Some of the element descriptions can be a little bit wordy and technical, so it's good to see an example. Okay. All right, so this would be, well, if you notice off to the left, you can see the table of contents that provide links to different parts. So this is in the first section, and it would be the title element. This first part would be purpose and scope, and basically it just gives the very basic rules for what you need in a title. So it says the title should have two parts, the name of the creator, and then the nature of the materials being described. Then it goes down to give a little bit more detail for the rules. The next section would be sources of information. So basically, where do you pull your information from? DACS will almost always say that you need to pull your information from the archival materials themselves, which is a good point because the archival materials you're working with are a primary source, and that is usually the best source of your information. The next section would be general rules. Oops. So again, it just kind of goes over the same sort of things that were described in that first purpose and scope. It wants to make sure that you uniquely identify the title. You don't want to give it a name that is almost the same as another archival collection, particularly in your own repository. And it also gives some commentary. So these would be usually exceptions to the rule or things that issues that you may run into that wouldn't be clear. So if you don't have a traditional creator of your records, but your own repository put the records together, it would give you guidelines for that. Under the name segment, it gives you rules for what the name means and where you pull that information from and how it should look. I believe it will also give you some information on what to capitalize and what not to capitalize. If you note here too in the name segment, it says record the name in the natural language order of the language of the person or corporate body's country. A good example of this would actually be Mark Twain. So if you have a bunch of diaries from that Mark Twain wrote in preparation for books, you wouldn't title it the Samuel Clemens collection or the Clemens, Samuel collection like you would find in a library catalog. You would use the natural language and the common usage of the name. So the Mark Twain collection or the Mark Twain papers would be correct. Although again, I mean, there are exceptions to every rule. You want to take into account the rules of your own repository as well as what you believe your researchers will expect. The DACS rules also go into what happens if you have more than one person as the creator. And it also gives rules for what if the name is changed, and this happens frequently with corporate bodies. It also has a section called the nature of the archival unit, and that means that these rules can be used when titling smaller units within the collection as well as the collection title. So these rules can be applied to the series level or the folder level. All right, and I think, yep, that's it for what I'm going to show you in DACS. And remember, hopefully you all have downloaded this onto your own work desktops by now. It is a useful resource. Okay. All right. So on to dates. So the rules in DACS state that you must label the earliest and most recent dates within the collection. DACS also includes rules for inclusive dates and bulk dates. Bulk dates can be really useful when you have a small handful of items, say from 1903, but the rest of the collections date from 1925 through 1960. So in this case, if you were just to write a general range of 1903 to 1960, that would be misleading to a researcher who is primarily looking for materials on someone's early life. It also gives rules for exclusions. This would include reproduction materials. So if you have reproductions of records within your collection, you don't give the dates for those. One of the other rule sections for dates is the estimated date range. So there are many terms that are acceptable. You can use approximate, circa. Basically, you just need to make a rule and stick with it for all of the collections in your repository. The extent element refers to size, and that's basically just types of measurement. You can use linear or cubic feet. That's pretty standard. Again, the goal is to pick one and then to stick with it, but you can also include number of boxes or number of items. And DACS will give you some examples. I think I have one inside the box there where there may be special circumstances such as special material that you want to highlight, digital material or approximate measurements. I worked in an architecture archive for a while, and we always made a note to record the number of photographs in each collection because that's what our users wanted the most. For the creator element, this refers to the person, organization, or group responsible for creating, collecting, or maintaining the material. It is not every single person who has created something in the collection. So business records would list the business as the creator, not each individual person who wrote a memo in the collection. And the same for personal papers. It's the person responsible for collecting. For the creator, you would actually follow naming authorities such as the Library of Congress. So back to that Mark Twain example, this is where you would put his name in a more formal fashion. So you would write down Clemens, comma, Samuel L., not Mark Twain. For the biographical or historical note, the biographical note is for when the creator is a person or persons, and this would include information such as the birth and the death dates, occupations, marriages, children, events, and accomplishments. If it's family papers, it should include the relationships between individuals that are prominent in the collections. The historical note is for institutions or businesses, corporations, that sort of thing. It includes the founding and, if applicable, the dissolution dates, the geographic location, the purpose or function, and if there are any name changes to the organization. And don't editorialize these sections. Use the words of the materials to describe them. Pull it from the collections. And always put the most relevant information first. So you wouldn't start out listing, you know, their elementary school or their high school or even college of the creator. Start out with, you know, so-and-so won the Nobel Prize. The biographical or historical note should be fairly brief, and if needed, you can give a bit more detail in the scope and content section. Some of the rules specific to this would be sub-elements, and that covers issues such as if there's more than one significant creator for the material. Also relationships, so that would be family, other historical figures who are relevant to the collection. For an organization, it can be the administration structure, any predecessors, or significant competitors or partners. The scope and content note provides an overview of the collection's contents. It includes the types of materials present, significant people, places, topics, or events documented. It also includes things like what you might expect that isn't there or what you might not expect that is there. So say you have business records and all of the financial documentation is missing. That's something that you would expect to have in business records, so you might want to call note of that stuff being missing. For the element regarding access and use restrictions, you want to give information on restrictions to access. So these can come from donor restrictions. It could be stipulated in the donor files themselves, or maybe it's due to sensitive information. You also want to note any restrictions on use. So maybe it's due to fragility, or you can only use digital copies of the collection. You also want to note if there are any restrictions on reproduction. So do you need permission from the donor? Are there copyright restrictions? Do you allow people to take photographs while they're doing research of the materials? That sort of thing. The DACS rules have, in their general rules, they have very specific examples. One of them is printed up here. And they have more general examples, which you'll commonly see written out on finding aids. Just access is restricted, consult the repository for details. For the abstract, this is not a required element, however, it can be very useful. For small institutions or places with extremely limited resources, an abstract may be a more realistic description of the contents of the collection than the lengthier scope and content. It's also great for smaller collections that don't need a lengthier traditional finding aid. There are some additional components of a finding aid, and it's important to note that DACS is currently under review. There's actually been a lot of debate on its relevance to archival description. And there are arguments that DACS is overly complicated and it does not effectively reflect researchers' habits and the way they read finding aids. So these first two elements that are in bold are currently optional, but they are becoming increasingly important. On the arrangement note or the processing information, I'm going to give you a quote about the arrangement note from the SAA Committee to Re-examine DACS. So they said that understanding all the hands that have contributed to the puzzle in front of them is critical to researchers' understanding and use of the records. This shouldn't be construed as nice but not required. This is a fundamental value and obligation for archivists, and it should be articulated in the principles for our national content standard. So basically what they're saying is that, if an archivist imposes order on a collection, you would note that there. Or if there are 28 archivists who have worked on the collection, that should be noted there too. Any information about how the collection is arranged or kind of odd things in the history of the arrangement of the collection can help inform researchers and let them understand why something may look a little odd to them. The series description, this is basically a scope and content note that is shorter and it's placed under the series headings. It's useful for large collections or for series where the title that you pulled from the records in the collection may be confusing or misleading to researchers. And there's also an argument that users go straight to the box list for information on the collection, skipping the scope and content. So a series description is placed in a location that is more useful to them. Other additional components that you can use, source of acquisition. This would just say if the collection was a gift or collected by the institution over the years. It would just give information about where your collection came from. And the inventory is also really helpful. It can be at the box or the folder level. The inventory is really not just useful to your researchers, but your repository can use it to track collections and make a more official inventory for your entire archival holdings. Related materials is another additional component. This can include books that are published on the subject or using the collection as the resource, or any other related collections at your repository or elsewhere. I also want to talk a little bit about controlled access headings. Terms in a controlled vocabulary are selected so that only one term represents a concept, allowing all material relating to that concept to be retrieved using that term, even if the term does not appear in the text. The term used for indexing purposes is the preferred term. The vocabulary may also include cross-references from non-preferred terms to preferred terms. Getty terms are useful for describing collections on artists, art movements, architects, or any similar related genre. And the Library of Congress subject headings, these would be personal names, subjects, corporate names, or geographic names. I also want to touch briefly on encoded archival description. This is a large subject and it's something that we don't necessarily have the means to get into today. However, I expect to see it in the future at DHPSNY programming. It's very similar to MARC standards. The goal is to make finding aids and archival descriptions machine readable. So this would be one of the steps you take in making your finding aids discoverable online. EAD can be confusing. The first time I hand encoded a finding aid, it was pretty brutal. If you are using a program like ArchiveSpace or Archivist Toolkit, it will do the encoding for you. There's also an excellent tool in development at for New York State, and it's called the Editor or EAD Editor, like editor. Keep your eye out for that. We will be promoting it as it becomes more commonly used. So some of these were mentioned earlier, and I also mentioned how DACS is under review and it's changing, but it's important to remember that DACS as well as archival practice, in general, these are dynamic and changing practices. So it's a good idea to be aware of ongoing discussions and to seek out educational opportunities, such as this one. And these are a few resources that you might want to take a look at. And then here is a bibliography on some of the resources that were used to put this webinar together. And that is pretty much the end. So I'm going to open it up to any questions that you guys have. Okay, somebody said, I see that revised DACS guidelines have recently been proposed. Have you looked at them? And if adopted, do you think that there will be many changes that will affect small organizations? I admit that I haven't even glanced at them yet. So as far as I can tell, there aren't any official changes to DACS yet, but some of the ones that I discussed earlier is adding that arrangement note just to give a kind of description of the reasoning behind your arrangement, and also including series description. There are a few other minor changes, but nothing set in stone yet, so keep your eye out. All right, well, it looks like that's it for the questions. Thank you guys so much for attending today. I really appreciate it. Oh, somebody asks, will processing workshops be offered again in the next year or so if you can't make the May dates? We haven't decided on that yet. It does seem that attendance is pretty high, so that will be discussed. Oh, will the curriculum for the processing workshop be available afterwards? Jason, do you know anything about that? We'll send an email out on that one. I'm not really sure. All right, I think that's it. So once again, thank you guys so much and have a great day.